The glass shattered. My daughter stumbled backward, and the dining room filled with generations of family portraits went absolutely still. My father's arm was still extended when she caught herself against the wall. 7 years old, too small to understand why her own grandfather's face twisted with that kind of disgust. Her eyes didn't fill with tears. That's the detail that broke me most. "That spot is reserved for actual family," he announced, voice carrying the weight of a man who'd never been questioned. "Remove her from this table." I didn't move toward her immediately. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let him see me break. I met his eyes and spoke 3 words that changed everything. "Leave immediately. Now." My mother's hand froze halfway to her pearl necklace. The imported champagne in her crystal flute trembled, creating tiny ripples that matched the shock spreading across the room. My father's expression shifted, not from understanding, but from sensing something fundamental had moved beneath his feet. That was the precise moment his empire began crumbling. He simply hadn't realized who was holding the demolition switch. I used to idolize that man throughout my childhood. He was the sun. Everything in our household orbited around earning his approval. I mastered the performance early: perfect grades, silent compliance, a marriage he orchestrated, a divorce he forbade. I met my ex-husband when I was still desperate to prove I deserved love. He possessed that dangerous charm that broken people often carry, kind until the mask slipped. My parents adored him because he understood when to agree with my father's opinions. When I finally left him, they labeled it rebellion. When I adopted my daughter 2 years later, they called it misguided charity work. "She's not authentically yours," my father commented once, smiling as though it was harmless observation. I pretended not to process the cruelty. I pretended frequently during those years. That pretending extracted the highest price from both of us. The signs accumulated gradually. My father stopped using her name, began referring to her as the child or your project. He repositioned her seat progressively further from the head of the table at every gathering. He corrected her behavior in front of company. He corrected my parenting when I defended her. I observed everything. I documented mentally. I maintained composure. The concrete evidence arrived through calculated carelessness: a forwarded message from my mother to her attorney. Subject line: estate distribution update. My father had restructured his entire will. Biological descendants exclusively, no exceptions permitted. He'd written in explicit language that my daughter represented a temporary charitable arrangement with no legitimate claim to family legacy. Temporary, like she was a foster situation he was tolerating until I came to my senses. I didn't confront him about the discovery. That would have been giving him opportunity to do damage control. Instead, I strategized. Real justice isn't theatrical, it's methodical. I consulted with an attorney specializing in estate law, then a second who handled corporate governance and family foundations. I studied which accounts required dual authorization, which properties carried hidden liens, which charitable organizations were legitimate versus which ones served as tax shelters protecting his reputation. I began recording conversations, not entrapment, simply documentation. He became reckless when he believed he controlled everything. I reached out to the board members of the foundation he'd chaired for 15 years, asking questions framed as a concerned daughter seeking to understand the family legacy. I allowed them to hear his responses, his exact phrasing, his barely concealed contempt for anyone he deemed inferior. I didn't attack his position. I systematically removed every foundation supporting it. Thanksgiving dinner was merely convenient timing. When he knocked that glass from the table near her, he wasn't seeing a 7-year-old child. He was seeing a threat to the narrative he'd constructed about bloodline purity and patriarchal control. After I ordered him to leave, he laughed. Pure reflex, muscle memory from decades of unchallenged authority. "This is my estate," he declared, voice carrying that familiar condescension. I nodded once. Not any longer. That's when I retrieved my phone and pressed play. His voice filled the formal dining room, calm and absolutely merciless, recorded 3 weeks earlier during a conversation he'd assumed was private. He discussed disinheriting me entirely, eliminating non-biological liabilities, explaining how genuine love was wasted on children who didn't carry his genetic material. My mother's face drained of color. My brother fixed his gaze on the antique silverware as though it could provide escape. My sister-in-law reached instinctively for her own children, pulling them slightly closer. Then the front door opened. Not law enforcement, something my father feared more. The foundation's board chairman, the family trust's independent trustee, and my attorney, who wore the expression of someone who'd already secured victory. My father attempted to speak. No one acknowledged him. He discovered who'd taken his position in devastating stages. First, the foundation board announced their unanimous emergency vote, effective immediately. His name removed from all letterhead, all donor materials, all public association. 40 years of carefully constructed philanthropic reputation deleted before coffee was served. Then the trust provisions activated, triggered by recorded evidence of discriminatory intent and documented prejudice, assets frozen pending comprehensive ethics review, my name elevated from secondary beneficiary to primary fiduciary authority. All decisions now required my explicit approval. Then the properties. The estate deed had been quietly transferred 4 months earlier, processed under legal advisement for tax optimization and generational planning. I owned it, completely, legally, irrevocably. When comprehension finally reached him, he stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. The truth was, I had been a stranger to him for years. He'd simply never bothered to notice. "Leave now," I repeated, softer this time. "For her sake, leave with whatever dignity you can still claim." He turned toward my mother, reaching for the alliance that had sustained him for 4 decades. She took one deliberate step backward. Power doesn't disappear. It simply finds a new address. Hours later, after the door finally closed and darkness swallowed his departure, I sat on the floor beside my daughter in her room. She asked the question I'd been preparing for. Did I make Grandpa angry? Is this my fault? I told her the complete truth. "No, sweetheart," I said, brushing hair from her face. "You showed him exactly who he really was, and he couldn't accept that." She nodded as though that explanation made perfect sense. Children possess a clarity about justice that adults systematically lose. The following weeks brought exactly what I'd anticipated. My father attempted to rally support, reaching out to extended family members, longtime business associates, country club companions who'd laughed at his jokes for decades. He discovered that power built on intimidation evaporates the moment people realize you can't retaliate. The Foundation Board released a carefully worded statement about pursuing a new direction aligned with genuine inclusive values. His name vanished from the wing of the children's hospital he'd supposedly championed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. The trust restructuring proceeded exactly as my attorneys had architected. Every asset he'd assumed was untouchable turned out to have provisions he'd never bothered reading completely. The family attorneys he'd relied on for years had actually been protecting the institution, not him personally. When forced to choose between a man and the legacy, they chose preservation. My mother filed for separation 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. Not divorce initially, just legal separation with very specific financial protections. She'd spent 40 years building her own quiet resentments, apparently. My father's treatment of my daughter had simply been the final crack in a foundation that had been fracturing for decades. She called me one evening, her voice carrying an unfamiliar lightness. "I should have done this 30 years ago," she admitted. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you the way you're protecting her." I accepted the apology. Forgiveness would take longer. My brother struggled with the transformation. He'd inherited my father's entitlement without the intelligence to maintain it. He made the mistake of confronting me at a family attorney meeting, demanding I stop this vindictive campaign and remember what family means. I looked at him across the conference table. "I remember exactly what family means. That's why I'm protecting mine. You're welcome to join us when you remember that her existence is non-negotiable." He left. We haven't spoken since. The estate became ours officially, legally, permanently. I had the portraits removed from the dining room, the ones showing generations of stern-faced ancestors who'd probably carried the same toxic certainty my father had wielded. We repainted, bright colors. My daughter chose yellow for the kitchen because it looks like happiness. I established a new family foundation focused specifically on adoption support, foster care advocacy, and chosen family resources. Every dollar my father had directed toward maintaining his reputation now funds the exact population he'd considered beneath consideration. The first grant went to the agency that connected me with my daughter. The director cried when I handed her the check. "This will change hundreds of lives," she said. "It already changed mine," I replied. My daughter is 10 now. She doesn't remember that Thanksgiving in detail, which is its own mercy. She knows her grandfather isn't part of our life, but she's surrounded by people who chose to love her deliberately. My mother visits weekly. My chosen family, friends who became sisters, aunts who aren't related by blood, create the network that biology failed to provide. She asked me recently why I didn't just walk away years earlier, why I stayed in contact with people who hurt us. I thought carefully before answering. Because leaving would have meant letting him keep everything he didn't deserve. I needed to stay long enough to take it back, not for revenge, for protection, so he could never hurt another child the way he tried to hurt you. She considered this. Did it work? Yes, I said. It worked. People often ask me if I feel guilty about dismantling my father's legacy so completely. The question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding. I didn't destroy his legacy. I revealed it. Everything I removed was built on a foundation of conditional love and arbitrary hierarchy. What collapsed wasn't strong enough to stand on its own. What I built in its place is different. It's constructed from choice, from deliberate love, from the understanding that family is defined by protection, not biology. My daughter will inherit an estate, yes, but more importantly, she'll inherit the knowledge that she was worth fighting for, that when someone tried to make her small, someone else fought to keep her whole. My father lives in a modest condo now, funded by the minimal trust distribution he can't be legally denied. We don't speak. He sends cards occasionally, testing whether time has softened my resolve. I don't respond. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. I didn't win by matching his cruelty. I didn't win by being louder or more dramatic. I won by being precise, by understanding that real tower isn't volume, it's structure. It's knowing which supports to remove so the entire edifice collapses on the person who built it on sand. He taught me how power operates. I simply learned to recognize when it was being abused, and I learned the precise mechanism to dismantle it. Last week, my daughter asked if she could invite her entire class to her birthday party. All 23 kids, plus siblings plus parents. "That's a lot of people," I said, smiling. "I know," she replied, "but I want everyone to feel included. No one should feel left out." She doesn't remember consciously, but she remembers in the ways that matter. She learned that love expands to include, it doesn't contract to exclude. She learned that family is what you build, not what you inherit. That night, after she fell asleep, I walked through the house we'd reclaimed together. Every room tells a different story now, not about legacy and lineage, but about choice and protection and the kind of love that doesn't come with conditions. My father built an empire on the idea that some people matter more than others. I dismantled it to prove that the only thing that matters is how you treat the ones who can't fight back. He lost his throne because he pushed a 7-year-old child. I took everything because I'm her mother, and that's what mothers do. We protect, even when it costs us everything else, especially then.